Worth more than words, Dakota Fletcher's wrists burned against the rough hemp rope that bound her to the weathered fence post, the scorching Arizona sun beating down mercilessly on her uncovered head as she struggled to maintain consciousness. It was 1885 in the unforgiving town of Copper Springs, and she had committed what the townspeople considered an unforgivable sin, speaking her mind to Harrison Blackwood, the most powerful man in the territory. The dust kicked up around her as a rider approached, his silhouette wavering in the heat waves rising from the baked earth. Dakota squinted, trying to make out his features, wondering if this was another of Blackwood's men coming to torment her further. She'd been tied to this fence since dawn, nearly 6 hours now with no water and no shade. Her tongue felt like sandpaper, and her once crisp blue calico dress was now stained with sweat and dirt. "Miss, you still with us?" The deep voice cut through her haze of discomfort as the rider dismounted. She blinked, trying to focus on the tall figure now standing before her. "I'm still here," she managed, her voice raspy from thirst. The man cursed under his breath, quickly pulling a canteen from his saddle. "Easy now," he said, holding it to her cracked lips. "Small sips." As the blessed water trickled down her throat, Dakota got her first good look at him. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair curled slightly beneath a well-worn Stetson, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw. He wasn't from Copper Springs. She would have remembered him. "Name's Quentin Reeves," he said, assessing the knots that bound her. "What in God's name are you doing tied to a fence in this heat?" "I talked back to the wrong man," Dakota replied, a spark of defiance still burning despite her weakened state. "Mr. Blackwood doesn't appreciate women with opinions." Quentin's jaw tightened as he pulled a knife from his boot. "Well, I don't appreciate men who tie women to fences." With a few swift movements, he cut through the ropes. As they fell away, Dakota nearly collapsed, her legs buckling after hours of standing. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy there," he murmured, supporting her weight effortlessly. "Why are you helping me?" Dakota asked, wary of kindness from strangers. In her experience, it always came with conditions. Quentin's eyes met hers, honest and direct. "Because you're worth it," he said simply. "No one deserves to be treated like this, especially not for speaking their mind." Dakota didn't know it then, as she leaned against this mysterious cowboy who had appeared like a mirage in the desert. But those 3 words, "you're worth it," would change the course of her life forever. Quentin helped her onto his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that seemed to match its owner in both strength and dignity. "Where can I take you?" he asked, swinging up behind her. Dakota hesitated. She had been working as a seamstress for Mrs. Holloway, but after today's events, she doubted her position would still be waiting for her. Blackwood had influence everywhere in town. I'm not sure I have anywhere to go," she admitted, the reality of her situation sinking in. "Blackwood owns half the businesses in Copper Springs. No one will cross him by helping me." Quentin considered this for a moment. "I've got a small cabin about 5 miles outside of town. It's not much, but you'd be welcome to rest there until you figure things out." Suspicion flickered across Dakota's face. "And what would you expect in return, Mr. Reeves?" A look of genuine surprise crossed his features, followed by understanding. "Nothing, Miss Fletcher. Dakota Fletcher. Miss Fletcher, I expect nothing in return except perhaps some conversation if you're willing. I've been riding solo for too long, and I find I miss the sound of another human voice." His tone was sincere, with no hint of ulterior motives. Dakota weighed her options. Stay in town and face Blackwood's wrath, or trust this stranger who had already shown her more kindness than anyone in Copper Springs ever had. "Very well, Mr. Reeves. I accept your offer." With that, Quentin urged his horse forward, away from the town that had shown Dakota such cruelty. As they rode, she found herself leaning back against his solid chest, too exhausted to maintain her usual rigid independence. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the comforting presence behind her lulled her into an unexpected sense of security. The cabin came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was indeed small, but well built, with a covered porch and a small corral for horses. A creek bubbled nearby, providing both water and a pleasant background melody. "It's not much," Quentin said as he helped her down from the horse, "but it's quiet and Blackwood's reach doesn't extend this far." Dakota took in the peaceful setting. "It's perfect," she said honestly. After the suffocating constraints of town life, the open space felt like freedom. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A cast iron stove sat in one corner, a table with 2 chairs in another. A bed was positioned against the far wall with a chest at its foot. A bookshelf held a surprising number of volumes, and a rocking chair sat by the window. "You can take the bed," Quentin said, setting her small bag down. "I'll make up a pallet by the stove." Dakota shook her head. "I couldn't put you out of your own bed. It's no trouble. You need the rest more than I do right now." His tone brooked no argument, and Dakota found she didn't have the energy to protest further. As Quentin busied himself preparing a simple meal, Dakota sank into the rocking chair, watching him move about the small space with easy familiarity. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel safe for the first time in longer than she cared to remember. "May I ask why Blackwood had you tied to that fence?" Quentin asked, as he set a plate of beans and cornbread before her. Dakota sighed, picking up her fork. "I worked as a seamstress for Mrs. Holloway. Blackwood came in to order new shirts, and he made some unsavory comments about the new schoolteacher, Miss Collins. I suggested that perhaps he should show more respect when speaking about a lady." She gave a bitter laugh. "He didn't appreciate the suggestion." Quentin's eyes darkened. "So he had you tied to a fence post in the blazing sun as punishment for defending another woman's honor? That's Blackwood for you. He owns the bank, the general store, and has the sheriff in his pocket. No one crosses him." "No one until now," Quentin said, a dangerous edge to his voice. Dakota studied him more carefully. "You're not just passing through, are you, Mr. Reeves?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, Miss Fletcher, I'm not. I've come to Copper Springs with a purpose." "And what purpose might that be?" "Harrison Blackwood ruined my family 15 years ago. My father was a rancher in Texas. Blackwood was his business partner. He embezzled everything, left my father with nothing but debts. My father couldn't live with the shame." His voice grew rough. "He took his own life, leaving my mother and me to fend for ourselves." Dakota's heart ached for the pain she saw in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I was 13, had to grow up fast. My mother died 3 years later, worked herself to death trying to keep us afloat." Quentin's gaze was fixed on something far away. "I've spent the last 12 years working, saving, and tracking Blackwood's movements. When I heard he'd settled here in Copper Springs, I knew it was time." "Time for what?" His eyes met hers, steel gray and resolute. "Time for justice, Miss Fletcher." A shiver ran down Dakota's spine, not entirely from fear. "Revenge, you mean?" "I mean to see him answer for his crimes, legally if possible. And if not legally," Quentin didn't answer immediately. "Eat your supper before it gets cold," he said finally. "You need your strength." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they ate, but Dakota couldn't forget what he'd revealed. Here was a man with as much reason to hate Harrison Blackwood as she had, perhaps more. It created an unexpected bond between them, a shared understanding that didn't need words. After dinner, exhaustion hit Dakota like a physical force. Quentin insisted she take the bed, and this time she didn't argue. The feel of the clean sheets against her skin was heaven after the day she'd endured. "Thank you," she murmured as sleep began to claim her, "for cutting me free, for saying I'm worth it." She thought she heard him reply, "You are worth it, Dakota Fletcher, more than you know." But perhaps that was just the beginning of a dream. Dawn broke clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the cabin's small window. Dakota woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. The events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Quentin was already up, moving quietly around the cabin. He glanced over when she stirred. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Like I spent yesterday tied to a fence post," she replied wryly, pushing back the covers. She was still in yesterday's dress, now hopelessly wrinkled. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough. There's coffee on the stove and I'm frying up some bacon." "Thank you." Dakota smoothed her hair as best she could, wishing for a brush and clean clothes. As if reading her thoughts, Quentin nodded toward a basin of water he'd prepared. "Thought you might want to freshen up. And I found an old shirt of mine you can use until we can get your things from town." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. "That's very kind," he shrugged, turning back to the stove. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing to Dakota. Small kindnesses had been rare in her life, especially from men. Orphaned at 16 and forced to make her own way in a world that valued women primarily as wives and mothers, she'd learned to be self-sufficient and wary. Quentin's consideration without expectation was unfamiliar territory. After washing her face and hands and changing into Quentin's offered shirt, which she belted with a length of rope and wore over her chemise, Dakota felt marginally more human. She joined him at the table, accepting a cup of strong black coffee with gratitude. "What happens now?" she asked after taking a fortifying sip. Quentin considered her question. "That depends partly on you. What do you want to happen?" The direct question caught her off guard. Few people had ever asked what she wanted. I need my things from Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, and I need work." "I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely." "You're not imposing," he said firmly, "but I understand needing your independence. We can ride into town today if you're up to it. Get your belongings at least. Won't Blackwood's men be looking for me?" "Probably. But they'll be looking for a woman alone, not one accompanied by a man they don't know." He paused. "Unless you'd rather I go alone." Dakota shook her head. "No, these are my problems. I won't hide while you face them for me." Approval flickered in his eyes. "All right then. We'll go together, quick and quiet. In and out before anyone knows we're there." They finished breakfast and prepared to leave. Quentin offered Dakota his spare hat to shield her from the sun, and she accepted gratefully. As they rode double on his horse, Dakota was acutely aware of his solid presence behind her, his arm occasionally brushing hers as he handled the reins. They approached Copper Springs from the east, avoiding the main street. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house sat on a quiet side street, a modest two-story building with a small garden in back. Quentin tethered his horse in the alley behind the house, and they slipped in through the back door that Dakota knew would be unlocked for the laundry woman. "My room is upstairs, last door on the right," Dakota whispered. "Mrs. Holloway should be at church this morning." They crept up the back stairs, avoiding the creaky third step that Dakota had memorized during her time there. Her room was small but neat, containing a narrow bed, a washstand, and a battered trunk that held all her worldly possessions. "This won't take long," she said, opening the trunk and quickly sorting through its contents. She selected a few dresses, undergarments, and personal items, wrapping them in a shawl to make a bundle. Quentin stood guard at the door, occasionally glancing down the hallway. "Any sign of trouble?" Dakota asked as she closed the trunk. "Not yet. Do you have everything you need?" She nodded, clutching her bundle. "Yes, there's not much to take." As they turned to leave, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. They froze, exchanging alarmed glances. The door swung open wider, revealing Mrs. Holloway, her Sunday bonnet still in place and a shocked expression on her face. "Dakota Fletcher, everyone's been saying you ran off after insulting Mr. Blackwood, but I didn't believe it. And now here you are, sneaking around with a strange man." The older woman's gaze traveled from Dakota to Quentin and back again, her disapproval evident. "Mrs. Holloway, it's not what you think," Dakota began, but the landlady cut her off. "I don't know what to think. You were always such a quiet, respectable girl. And now this. Mr. Blackwood's men have been asking after you. They seemed quite determined to find you." Quentin stepped forward, removing his hat respectfully. "Madam, I apologize for the intrusion. Miss Fletcher was in a difficult situation yesterday and I offered her assistance. We've come only to collect her belongings." Mrs. Holloway eyed him suspiciously. "And who might you be, sir?" "Quentin Reeves, madam. I have a small ranch outside of town." Something in his manner seemed to reassure the older woman. She sniffed, but appeared slightly mollified. "Well, Mr. Reeves, I hope you understand that I run a respectable establishment. I can't have my boarders disappearing with strange men, no matter the circumstances." "I understand completely," Quentin replied. "And I assure you Miss Fletcher's reputation is safe with me. I've provided her with separate accommodations while she determines her next steps." Dakota was impressed by Quentin's diplomatic handling of the situation. Mrs. Holloway still looked disapproving, but her posture relaxed slightly. "Mrs. Holloway," Dakota said gently, "did Mr. Blackwood tell you what happened yesterday?" The landlady hesitated. "He said you were impertinent and ran off when reprimanded. He had me tied to a fence post in the sun for hours, Mrs. Holloway, for suggesting he speak more respectfully about Miss Collins." Dakota's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly at the memory. Mrs. Holloway's eyes widened. "Surely not. It's true," Quentin confirmed. "I found her there myself, cut her loose." A conflict of emotions played across the older woman's face. "That does seem excessive, even for Mr. Blackwood." "I won't be returning to work at the dress shop," Dakota said. "But I wanted to collect my things properly, not leave you wondering what had happened to me." Mrs. Holloway sighed. "You always were an honest girl, Dakota, too honest for your own good sometimes." She glanced at the bundle in Dakota's arms. "You've paid your rent through the end of the month. The room is yours until then should you need to return." The offer surprised Dakota. It was as close to taking her side as Mrs. Holloway could come, given Blackwood's influence in town. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Now go, both of you, before someone sees you here. Use the back stairs." They didn't need to be told twice. With quick nods of thanks, they hurried down the back staircase and out to where Quentin's horse waited. As they mounted, Dakota glanced back at the boarding house, a small pang of regret for the life she was leaving behind. "You all right?" Quentin asked quietly. "Yes," she replied, realizing it was true. "Let's go home." The word slipped out before she could catch it. Quentin's cabin wasn't her home, and yet in the span of a day it had become a sanctuary, a place where she felt safe. She tensed, waiting for him to correct her presumption. Instead, his arm tightened briefly, reassuringly around her waist. "Home it is," he said, and urged the horse forward. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the town receding behind them. Dakota's thoughts turned to her uncertain future. She had some savings, but not enough to leave the area entirely. And now that she defied Blackwood, finding work in Copper Springs would be nearly impossible. "I can almost hear you thinking," Quentin said, breaking into her reverie. "Want to share what's on your mind?" Dakota sighed. "Just trying to figure out my next steps. I'm not one to sit idle, Mr. Reeves." "Quentin," he corrected gently. "After saving you from a fence post and harboring you from Blackwood, I think we're past formalities." A small smile touched her lips. "Quentin, then, and I'm Dakota." "Well, Dakota, as it happens, I could use some help around the ranch. Nothing too strenuous, but there's cooking, cleaning, mending to be done. I'd pay you fair wages, of course." She twisted in the saddle to look at him. "Are you offering me a job if you want it? No obligation. And you're welcome to stay regardless." The offer was tempting, but Dakota was wary of becoming dependent on anyone, even someone as seemingly honorable as Quentin. "I wouldn't want to interfere with your plans regarding Blackwood." His expression grew serious. "You wouldn't be. In fact, having you around might help. You know Blackwood, know how he operates in town. That could be valuable information." "So I'd be helping you get revenge, Justice," he corrected. "And yes, if you're willing." Dakota considered this. The idea of helping bring down Harrison Blackwood was undeniably appealing. The man had terrorized Copper Springs for years, using his money and influence to bend people to his will. And now, he had made an enemy of her personally. But more than that, working with Quentin would give her purpose, a reason to stay. "All right," she said finally. "I accept your offer, but on one condition." "Name it. Whatever you're planning with Blackwood, don't keep me in the dark. I want to know everything." Quentin studied her for a long moment, as if assessing her resolve. Finally, he nodded. "Fair enough. Partners, then?" "Partners," Dakota agreed, feeling as if she'd just crossed some invisible threshold into a new chapter of her life. Back at the cabin, Dakota settled in with surprising ease. She arranged her few belongings in a corner Quentin cleared for her, then set about making the space more livable. By evening, the cabin was tidier. A stew was simmering on the stove, and Dakota had sewn up a tear in one of Quentin's shirts. "You didn't have to do all this," Quentin said as they sat down to dinner. "You're still recovering." "I'm not made of glass," Dakota replied, "and keeping busy helps me think." "And what have you been thinking about, Blackwood? What exactly is your plan for bringing him to justice?" Quentin set down his spoon. "I've been gathering evidence of his crimes over the years. Bank fraud, embezzlement, land theft. I have documents, witness testimonies. Enough to bring charges if I can find a lawman willing to stand up to him." "That's a big if in these parts," Dakota pointed out. "The sheriff here is firmly in Blackwood's pocket." "I know. That's why I've been corresponding with a federal marshal based in Tucson. He's interested in my evidence, says Blackwood's been on their radar for some time." Dakota was impressed. "That's more thorough than I expected." "I thought you might just be planning to call him out for a gunfight." A flicker of something shame, crossed Quentin's face. "I considered that route once. Even fantasized about it during those early years after my father died. But my mother made me promise to seek justice, not vengeance." He met Dakota's eyes. "Killing Blackwood might satisfy something in me, but it wouldn't restore what he stole from all his victims. And I'd likely hang for it. What good would that do anyone?" The maturity and restraint in his reasoning surprised and moved her. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." A soft smile touched his lips. "She would have liked you, I think. You have the same spine of steel." The compliment warmed Dakota more than it should have. "So what's our next move?" The marshal, James Donnelly, is due to arrive in a week. "Until then, we lay low, avoid drawing Blackwood's attention." Dakota nodded, but a thought nagged at her. "What if Blackwood's men come looking for me here? They'd have to find us first. Not many people know about this place, but just in case. He stood and went to a chest in the corner, retrieving a revolver. "Do you know how to use one of these?" Dakota eyed the weapon. "My pa taught me the basics before he died, but it's been a while." "We'll practice tomorrow," Quentin said, placing the gun on the table between them. "Just in case." The next morning, Quentin set up targets behind the cabin tin cans on a fallen log. He showed Dakota how to load the revolver, check that it was ready to fire, and aim properly. "Keep both eyes open," he instructed, standing close behind her as she took aim. "And breathe out as you squeeze the trigger. Don't pull." Dakota was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of him at her back, his hands occasionally adjusting her stance. She forced herself to concentrate on the target, not on the way her pulse quickened when he spoke low near her ear. Her first few shots went wide, but by the end of the morning she was hitting the cans regularly. "Not bad," Quentin said approvingly. "You're a quick study." "Had a good teacher," she replied, trying to ignore the pleased flush that his praise evoked. They fell into a routine over the next few days. Mornings were spent on ranch chores, feeding the horses, tending the small vegetable garden, repairing fences. Afternoons often included target practice and discussions of Blackwood's operations in town, with Dakota filling in details about his associates and business practices that Quentin hadn't known. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. Sometimes they talked, sharing stories of their lives before Copper Springs. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts but drawing comfort from the other's presence. Dakota found herself growing increasingly comfortable with Quentin. He was unlike any man she'd known before, thoughtful, respectful, and genuinely interested in her opinions. He never spoke down to her or dismissed her ideas, even when they disagreed. It was a novel experience, being treated as an equal. For his part, Quentin seemed to enjoy her company as well. He smiled more often, laughed at her dry observations about town life, and went out of his way to bring back small treats from his infrequent trips to neighboring ranches, a jar of honey, a book he thought she might enjoy, fresh berries he'd spotted growing wild. 4 days after her rescue, Dakota was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard riders approaching. Her heart raced as she ducked behind a sheet, peering around it cautiously. Quentin had gone to check on a boundary fence and wasn't expected back for hours. 2 men on horseback came into view, both wearing dusty trail clothes and gun belts. They weren't Blackwood's usual thugs, at least not ones Dakota recognized, but that didn't mean they weren't dangerous. Moving quietly, she retreated to the cabin, closing the door softly behind her. She retrieved the revolver Quentin had given her from its hiding place and checked that it was loaded, just as he'd taught her. Then she positioned herself beside the window, where she could see the approaching riders without being easily spotted. The men dismounted, tying their horses to the hitching post. One was tall and lean, with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. The other was shorter, more solidly built, with a gray streaked beard. Neither looked particularly threatening, but Dakota kept the gun ready just in case. A knock sounded at the door. "Hello, anyone home?" called a deep voice. Dakota remained silent, unsure whether to respond. "Marshal Donnelly, United States Marshal Service," the voice continued. "Looking for Quentin Reeves." Dakota's eyes widened. This was the marshal Quentin had mentioned, the one who wasn't supposed to arrive for several more days. She hesitated, then called out, "Mr. Reeves isn't here at the moment." There was a pause. "Who am I speaking with, madam?" "Dakota Fletcher. I'm a friend of Mr. Reeves." Another pause. "Miss Fletcher, would you mind opening the door? I promise we mean no harm." Dakota considered her options. If this truly was Marshal Donnelly, Quentin would want her to speak with him. But if it was a trick— "I'll open the door," she said finally, "but I should warn you that I'm armed." A chuckle came from outside. "Noted, Miss Fletcher. We'll keep our hands where you can see them." Keeping the revolver half hidden in the folds of her skirt, Dakota opened the door. The two men stood a respectful distance back, hands clearly visible as promised. "Miss Fletcher," the taller man said with a nod. "I'm Marshal James Donnelly. This is Sheriff Thomas Wilkes from Tucson." "You're early," Dakota said, not lowering the gun. "Quentin said you weren't expected for another few days." Donnelly nodded. "Had a chance to catch an earlier train. Thought it best not to delay, given the nature of the situation." "And how do I know you're really who you say you are?" The marshal smiled approvingly. "Cautious. Good. My badge is in my inside pocket. May I?" At Dakota's nod, he slowly reached into his jacket and produced an official-looking badge. It appeared genuine, though Dakota wasn't entirely sure what a real marshal's badge should look like. "Mr. Reeves should be back within a few hours," she said, finally lowering the gun slightly. "You're welcome to wait if you'd like." "Much obliged," Donnelly said. "It's been a long ride from the station." Dakota stepped back, allowing them to enter the cabin. She kept the revolver within reach as she set about making coffee, watching the men surreptitiously as they settled at the table. "So, Miss Fletcher," Donnelly said conversationally, "how do you come to be acquainted with Mr. Reeves? He didn't mention a lady friend in his correspondence." Dakota hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's a recent acquaintance. He helped me when I was in trouble." "Trouble with Harrison Blackwood?" Sheriff Wilkes asked shrewdly. "Yes," Dakota admitted, seeing no point in lying. "How did you know?" "Most trouble in these parts seems to lead back to Blackwood," Wilkes replied. "Man's got a talent for making enemies." Dakota set cups of coffee before the men, then took a seat across from them, the revolver resting in her lap. "Quentin said you've been gathering evidence against Blackwood for some time." Donnelly nodded. "Been building a case for nearly 2 years. Blackwood's slippery knows how to cover his tracks, but Mr. Reeves has provided some compelling documentation." "Enough to arrest him?" Dakota asked. "That depends on what else we can verify," Wilkes said. "We need witnesses willing to testify." "That's always the hardest part with men like Blackwood. People are afraid." Dakota understood that fear all too well. "And if you do arrest him, what happens then?" "He'll be taken to Tucson for trial," Donnelly explained. "Federal charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, racketeering. Could face substantial prison time if convicted." "If," Dakota emphasized. The marshal's expression was grim. "Men with Blackwood's money and connections have ways of influencing courts, but we've got a good judge lined up, one who can't be bought." The sound of hoofbeats outside interrupted their conversation. Dakota tensed, but relaxed when she recognized the familiar rhythm of Quentin's horse. "That'll be Mr. Reeves now," she said, rising. The door opened and Quentin stepped in, freezing momentarily at the sight of the unexpected visitors. His hand moved instinctively toward his gun. "It's all right," Dakota said quickly. "Marshal Donnelly and Sheriff Wilkes from Tucson." Recognition dawned in Quentin's eyes. "Marshal, you're early." "So I've been told," Donnelly said with a smile, standing to shake Quentin's hand. "Hope you don't mind the surprise." "Not at all," Quentin replied, though Dakota noted the tension in his shoulders. "I see you've met Miss Fletcher." "Indeed. Charming lady." "Cautious too greeted us with that revolver you're so fond of." Quentin's eyes met Dakota's, a hint of pride in them. "Good. I see you've been practicing what I taught you." "I'm a quick study, remember," she replied, a small smile playing at her lips. The men spent the next several hours discussing strategy. Donnelly had brought warrants for Blackwood's arrest, but executing them would be tricky. Blackwood rarely left town, and within Copper Springs, he was surrounded by loyal or at least well-paid supporters. "We need to draw him out," Wilkes suggested. "Get him somewhere with fewer friends around." "He doesn't leave town often," Dakota said. "Except for the monthly card game at the Broken Spoke Ranch, high-stakes poker with the other big ranchers in the territory." Quentin looked at her with interest. "How do you know about that?" "Mrs. Holloway does the laundry for the Broken Spoke. She mentioned it once, said Blackwood always comes back in a foul mood if he loses." Donnelly leaned forward. "When's the next game?" "Tomorrow night," Dakota replied. "The last Friday of every month." The men exchanged significant looks. "That could work," Donnelly said thoughtfully. "Catch him on the road back to town, away from his usual protection." "He'll still have men with him," Quentin pointed out. "He never travels alone." "How many?" Wilkes asked. "Usually 2, Dakota answered. "His foreman, Pike, and whoever's in favor that week." Donnelly nodded decisively. 3 against 3, I like those odds." Quentin frowned. 3, you, me, and Wilkes here," Donnelly said, as if it were obvious. "I want to help too," Dakota interjected. 4 pairs of eyes turned to her in surprise. "Absolutely not," Quentin said firmly. "It's too dangerous." Dakota bristled. "I can handle a gun now, and I have as much reason to want Blackwood brought to justice as any of you." "Miss Fletcher," Donnelly said gently, "we appreciate your spirit, but this is official business. Civilians shouldn't be involved in apprehending potentially dangerous criminals." "I was involved the moment Blackwood had me tied to that fence," Dakota replied, her voice steady despite the memory. "And I won't sit here waiting while you 3 risk your lives." Quentin moved to her side, speaking low enough that only she could hear. "Dakota, please. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you." The raw concern in his voice gave her pause. She looked up, meeting his gray eyes, reading the emotions there that he hadn't put into words. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first day. "I'll stay back," she conceded finally. "But I'm coming." "You might need an extra pair of eyes watching your backs." Quentin held her gaze for a long moment, then sighed. "You'll stay well out of firing range, and at the first sign of serious trouble, you ride back here as fast as you can. Promise me." "I promise," Dakota agreed, knowing it was the best compromise she would get. Donnelly and Wilkes exchanged glances but didn't argue further. They spent the rest of the evening fine-tuning their plan, mapping out the road from the Broken Spoke Ranch, and identifying the best spot for an ambush, a narrow section where the road dipped between 2 rocky outcroppings. "We'll position ourselves here and here," Donnelly indicated on the rough map they'd drawn. "When Blackwood's party approaches, we'll identify ourselves as federal officers and order them to surrender." "And if they don't?" Dakota asked, voicing the question no one else seemed willing to. Donnelly's expression was grim. "Then we do what's necessary. But let's be clear, I want Blackwood alive. Dead men don't stand trial, and dead men don't reveal their accomplices." The gravity of what they were planning settled over the cabin. This wasn't just about personal vengeance anymore. It was about justice in its most official form. As night fell, Donnelly and Wilkes departed for the hotel in the next town over, not wanting to risk being seen in Copper Springs before the arrest. They would meet Quentin and Dakota at the ambush site the following evening. After they left, a heavy silence filled the cabin. Dakota busied herself clearing away the coffee cups and tidying the table, aware of Quentin watching her from across the room. "You don't have to come tomorrow," he said finally. "No one would think less of you for staying here." Dakota set down the cup she was drying. "I would think less of me," she replied simply. "I need to see this through, Quentin, for myself." He crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I understand needing closure, but Dakota, if anything happened to you..." She looked up at him, struck by the intensity in his eyes. "Nothing will happen to me. I'll stay back, just as I promised." Quentin raised a hand, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "When this is over," he said softly, "when Blackwood is behind bars and this chapter is closed." What then? It was a question Dakota had been asking herself. What came after vengeance, after justice? "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead. Would you consider staying?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning beyond the simple words. Dakota's heart quickened. "Here, with you?" "Yes." His voice was rough with emotion. "These past few days with you, they've reminded me of what life can be, should be. Not just existing, moving from one day to the next with nothing but revenge to drive me." "Quentin," she began, but he shook his head. "You don't have to answer now, just think about it, please." Before she could respond, he stepped back, creating distance between them. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Dakota nodded, though rest seemed unlikely with her thoughts in such turmoil. As she prepared for bed, she couldn't help wondering if she was being foolish, allowing herself to imagine a future with this man she'd known for less than a week. And yet, there was something between them, something real and powerful that couldn't be denied. Morning came too quickly, gray light filtering through the cabin windows. Dakota rose, finding Quentin already awake, checking and cleaning his revolver at the table. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, noting the shadows under his eyes. "Some," he replied, not looking up from his task. "You? Enough." It was a lie, but a harmless one. They were both on edge, anticipating the confrontation to come. The day passed with agonizing slowness. They went about their usual chores, speaking little, each lost in their own thoughts. As evening approached, they prepared to leave, Quentin saddling both his horse and a smaller mare he kept for occasional use. "Stay close to me on the ride out," he instructed as he helped Dakota mount. "Once we reach the ambush point, you'll position yourself on that rise we discussed, well back from the road." "I remember the plan," she assured him, tucking the revolver securely into the pocket of her riding skirt. They rode out as the sun began to set, the desert landscape transformed by the golden light. Under different circumstances, it would have been a beautiful ride. Now, each hoofbeat seemed to echo with tension. They reached the designated spot just as twilight deepened into true darkness. Donnelly and Wilkes were already there, their horses hidden among the rocks that lined the road. "Right on time," Donnelly said in a low voice. "Blackwood's party left the Broken Spoke about an hour ago. Should be passing this way soon." Quentin nodded, turning to Dakota. "Up to the rise now. Remember your promise." "I remember," she said, reaching out impulsively to squeeze his hand. "Be careful." His fingers tightened briefly around hers. "Always am." Dakota guided her mare up the gentle slope to the rocky outcropping that overlooked the road. From this vantage point, she could see the entire scene below. Donnelly and Wilkes positioned on one side of the road, Quentin on the other, all partially concealed by boulders and scrub brush. The road itself was silver in the moonlight, stretching away into the darkness. Time crawled by. Dakota's eyes strained in the darkness, watching for any sign of movement on the road. The night was quiet except for the occasional cry of a distant coyote and the soft nickering of her mare. Then she heard it, the rhythmic sound of hooves on packed earth, growing louder. She tensed, her hand moving to the revolver in her pocket. 3 riders appeared around a bend in the road, moving at a steady pace. Even in the moonlight, Dakota recognized Harrison Blackwood's broad-shouldered silhouette at the center. Pike rode slightly ahead, while a third man Dakota didn't recognize brought up the rear. As they approached the narrowest part of the pass, Donnelly stepped out into the road, badge held high. "Harrison Blackwood, United States Marshal Service. You're under arrest." Everything happened at once. Pike went for his gun, Wilkes shouted a warning, and gunfire erupted below. Dakota's heart hammered in her chest as she struggled to make sense of the chaotic scene. Blackwood had wheeled his horse around and was attempting to retreat the way they had come, while Pike exchanged shots with Donnelly and Wilkes. The third man had been hit and fallen from his horse, which bolted past Dakota's position in a panic. Then Dakota saw something that made her blood run cold. A fourth rider, previously hidden in the shadows, was approaching from behind Quentin's position. Blackwood hadn't brought just two men after all. "Quentin, behind you," she screamed, but her voice was lost in the cacophony of gunfire. Without thinking, Dakota drew her revolver and fired a warning shot into the air. The new arrival looked up, momentarily distracted. It was enough time for Quentin to turn and spot the threat, diving to the side just as the man fired. The bullet missed Quentin, but the danger wasn't over. Blackwood had seen his opportunity and was now charging toward Quentin's position, gun drawn. Dakota took aim. Remembering everything Quentin had taught her, both eyes open, breathe out, squeeze, don't pull. Her shot caught Blackwood's horse in the flank. The animal reared in pain, throwing its rider to the ground. Blackwood landed hard, his gun flying from his hand. Quentin was on him in an instant, pinning him down while Donnelly rushed to assist. The fourth rider, seeing his employer captured, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 2 minutes, but to Dakota, it had seemed like hours. She sat trembling on her horse, the revolver still clutched in her hand, watching as Donnelly handcuffed Blackwood and Pike. Only when she was certain the danger had passed did she guide her mare down from the rise to join the men on the road. Quentin looked up as she approached, his face registering first relief, then concern, then something that might have been admiration. "You saved my life," he said simply as she dismounted. "I broke my promise," she replied, suddenly unsure of herself. "I fired a shot." "Thank God you did," Donnelly interjected, securing the last set of handcuffs on the fourth rider. "That warning shot probably saved all our hides." Blackwood, kneeling in the dust with his hands cuffed behind him, glared up at Dakota with pure hatred. "You," he spat. "The seamstress with the sharp tongue, should have left you tied to that fence to rot." Dakota met his gaze steadily. "You won't be tying anyone to fences where you're going, Mr. Blackwood." "Don't be too sure of that," Blackwood sneered. "Men like me don't stay in jail long. Money talks, girl." "Not this time," Donnelly said firmly. "You're facing federal charges, Blackwood. Different ball game entirely." As Donnelly and Wilkes prepared to transport their prisoners to Tucson, Quentin drew Dakota aside. In the silver moonlight, his face was a study in conflicting emotions. "When I heard that shot and saw you on that rise," he said, his voice rough, "my heart nearly stopped, but you were magnificent." Dakota flushed at the praise. "I just did what needed doing." "You did more than that. You faced your fear, you stood your ground." His hands came to rest lightly on her shoulders. "You're the bravest person I've ever known, Dakota Fletcher." Before she could respond, he pulled her into a fierce embrace. Dakota stiffened in surprise, then melted against him, her arms finding their way around his waist. She breathed in the scent of him, leather and gunpowder, and something uniquely Quentin, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, completely safe. "I thought I might lose you," he murmured against her hair. "When I saw that fourth rider." But you didn't, she assured him, pulling back slightly to look up into his face. We're both still here. His eyes searched hers, filled with questions and possibilities. About what I asked yesterday, about staying. Dakota smiled, a real, full smile that reached her eyes. Yes, she said simply. Yes, he repeated as if not quite believing. Yes, I'll stay with you, if you still want me to. His answer came not in words but in action. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Quentin lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, almost reverent. Dakota responded with a boldness that surprised even herself, rising on tiptoe to deepen the contact. When they finally parted, both somewhat breathless, Donnelly called from the road, "Reeves, we're moving out." "You two coming back to Tucson with us?" Quentin looked at Dakota, a question in his eyes. She shook her head slightly. "Not tonight," Quentin called back. "We'll follow tomorrow." "Suit yourselves," Donnelly replied. "First stage leaves at noon. Don't be late, prosecutor will want statements from both of you." With final nods of farewell, Donnelly and Wilkes set off with their prisoners, leaving Quentin and Dakota alone on the moonlit road. "Home?" Quentin asked softly, taking her hand in his. "Home," Dakota agreed. The ride back to the cabin was peaceful, the tension of the past days finally beginning to ebb. They rode side by side now, no longer needing the protection of riding double. Occasionally, their hands would reach across the space between them, fingers brushing in reassurance that the other was still there. As the cabin came into view, Dakota felt a surprising sense of homecoming. In just a few short days, this place had become more of a home to her than anywhere she'd lived since her parents died. Inside, the familiar space welcomed them with its simple comforts. Quentin lit the lamps while Dakota built up the fire in the stove, working together in easy companionship. "Are you hungry?" Dakota asked, reaching for a pot. Quentin caught her hand, gently pulling her away from the stove and into his arms. "It can wait," he said, his voice low and warm. "Right now, I just want to hold you, to know this is real." Dakota leaned into his embrace, allowing herself to fully experience the moment. "It's real," she assured him. "We're real." They stood like that for a long time, the steady beat of their hearts creating a rhythm that seemed to echo the same message: home, home, home. The next morning, they rode to Tucson together, where they gave their statements to the federal prosecutor. The evidence against Blackwood was overwhelming. Quentin's carefully gathered documentation, combined with testimony from Dakota and several other victims who came forward once they heard of Blackwood's arrest, ensured that he would face the full force of the law. "He'll get 20 years at least," the prosecutor assured them. "Maybe more. He won't trouble Copper Springs or anywhere else for a very long time." The news should have brought pure satisfaction, but Dakota was surprised to find herself feeling something more complex. Not pity for Blackwood, never that, but a certain emptiness, as if a driving force in her life had suddenly disappeared. Quentin seemed to understand without her having to explain. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said as they left the prosecutor's office. "Spending so long focused on one goal, and then suddenly it's accomplished." "What do we do now?" Dakota asked, giving voice to the question that had been hovering between them. Quentin took her hand, his grip warm and sure. "Whatever we want, that's the beauty of it. For the first time in 15 years, I'm not defined by what Blackwood took from me. I can just be me. And who is that? The real Quentin Reeves." A slow smile spread across his face. "A rancher. A man who likes simple things, good horses, open country, honest work." His eyes met hers. "A man who's falling in love with a remarkable woman who talks back when she should and stands her ground when others would flee." Dakota's heart skipped at the declaration. "Falling in love, fallen," he corrected softly. "Completely. Joy bloomed within her, bright and unexpected. "I think I've fallen too," she admitted. "Though it seems impossible we've known each other such a short time." "Some things don't need time," Quentin said, bringing her hand to his lips. "Some things you just know in your bones, in your heart." They spent the night in Tucson, in separate rooms at a respectable hotel. The next morning they began the journey back to Copper Springs, not to the town itself, but to Quentin's cabin, to the life they would build together. Spring gave way to summer, and summer to fall. The cabin expanded, a new room added, a larger garden planted, a proper fence constructed around the property. Dakota's seamstress skills found a new market among the neighboring ranches, while Quentin's herd grew steadily under his careful management. Word spread about Blackwood's conviction and 25-year sentence. Copper Springs began to change, as if a dark cloud had lifted from the town. The sheriff was replaced in a special election, businesses changed hands, and a new sense of optimism took hold. Dakota and Quentin married in October, a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher with Marshal Donnelly and Sheriff Wilkes as witnesses. Dakota wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. "You're worth it," Quentin whispered as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Worth everything." The words that had first given her hope now sealed their commitment to each other. Dakota's eyes shimmered with tears as she repeated them back to him. "You're worth it too." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their home, Dakota reflected on the strange and winding path that had led her here. From the horror of being tied to a fence post to the joy of finding a love she had never expected, it seemed almost impossible, and yet it was utterly real. "What are you thinking?" Quentin asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best," she replied honestly. "If Blackwood hadn't had me tied to that fence, I would have found you anyway," Quentin said with conviction. "Some things are meant to be, Dakota. We were meant to find each other." She smiled in the darkness, pressing closer to his warmth. "You're a romantic, Quentin Reeves." "Only with you," he murmured, kissing her softly. "Only ever with you." As winter settled over the land, bringing crisp, clear days and star-filled nights, Dakota discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled their home with even greater joy and anticipation. "A son or daughter," Quentin marveled, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our family." "Our future," Dakota agreed. "A future that's ours to shape, not defined by the past." And as the seasons turned and their family grew, first a daughter with Dakota's spirit and Quentin's eyes, then 2 years later a son with his father's quiet strength, they built that future together, day by day, moment by moment. Sometimes, on summer evenings when the desert air was sweet with sage and promise, Dakota would remember that terrible day at the fence post, the day when it had seemed her spirit might break. And then she would look at Quentin, at their children playing in the yard of the home they had built together, and know with absolute certainty that he had been right that day and every day since. She was worth it. They both were. Worth the struggle, worth the pain, worth every step of the journey that had brought them here. To this life, they had created a life built on respect, on courage, and most of all on love. And in the end, that was all that mattered.